Welcome to Special Stage for coverage from round 5 of the Britpart British Cross Country Championship. We'd head to a rather unlikely home of cross-country motorsport, Milton Keynes. But there wouldn't be any roundabouts in sight for our competitors this weekend. Instead, they were faced with a course in and around a motocross track, providing a new challenge here at round 5 of the championship. Without further ado then, let's head out onto the morning runs, and it would be the early lead for Paul Rowlands and Neil Lloyd. They start the day well, opening up a small, but at this stage, crucial 4-second advantage. Paul, of course, no stranger to racing at similar venues in other forms of racing, so the jumps and bumps wouldn't be phasing him at all this weekend. If you ask Andy DiGiulio and Paul Foley, they'd tell you that they'd had their fair share of bad luck this season, and they were due some good luck. They'd be looking to try and get something to go their way before the season was over, and they start well. Second place for now, close to the lead as well, in a fighting position. All they had to do was hope that Lady Luck played their way this weekend. For Justin Birchall and Johnny Kunja, it would be third. They were a little way back from the crews in front, and they'd need to catch up some time if they wanted to fight for those top 2 positions. Ian Gregg and Adam Evans, meanwhile, make a good start in 4th. They were the only ones in Class 6 this weekend, so that position would be a given if they could just finish. And as we've seen so often in the British Cross Country Championship, that in itself is a bit of a challenge. Instead, they'd have their eyes on that overall result. They were currently only 9 seconds back from Birchall. With no time for the customary walking of the course, due to arriving late on the Friday, it would be a slower start than Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson would have liked ideally. But they do get into things after a few runs, digging deep. Sadly, a misfire this morning wasn't helping their cause, but 5th place for now, second in Class 10, was not bad to show for their efforts. Just behind Jacks and Nicholson on the results were Martin and Aston Cox, 3 seconds behind in fact. No breathing space at all in this championship, so they would want to push through the afternoon to try and gain that position, and maybe with it a few more before the end of the opening day. After a string of strong results, it was safe to say that this round wasn't exactly going to plan for Phil Bayliss and Lance Murphy. Despite confidence riding high, or perhaps as a result of it, an impact on the second run would cause the steering wheel to turn suddenly, breaking a bone in Phil's hand. The rest of the event was going to have to be driven one-handed, and managing that pain as well. No doubt, a lot of that to contend with for the rest of the weekend. For Ocean Riley and Philip Richards, it would be 8th place to start the day. A couple of minutes back from Bayliss, but with his problems, of course, that could well change. The pair would be still trying to climb the leaderboard, regardless of what happened up ahead. Run 2 would be where the problems would start for Ryan and Darren Cook. 2 minutes slower on that run, frustratingly for them, ending the morning way back from where they would like to be. 9th place overall. And rounding out our top 10 would be Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall. A drive belt snapping on run 2 would see them dropping down the leaderboard and ending what could have been another good run for the pair. Let's take a look, as we always do, at some of the positions outside of that top 10 leaderboard. And it would be Richard Green and Richard Griffiths leading the way in Class 7. A good start for the pair with 1.5 minutes advantage in the class now. This weekend would be Liam Griffin and Robert Daniels' first time out in the British Cross Country Championship, and they seemed to be getting into the swing of things. They were certainly enjoying themselves, the times improving rapidly as the morning went on as well. We'd see Steve Hyatt and Ian McMahon out this weekend, sadly, with some issues, losing around 5 minutes on the 3rd run of the morning and tumbling down the order to 13th. Frustratingly for them, that would turn into retirement for the pair. They wouldn't manage to make it back out for the afternoon runs. This weekend as well would be the last event in the championship for Chloe Jones and Chris Aldred, so they needed to make it count. They weren't, though, getting into the rhythm that they'd wanted to in the car over the morning's runs. Some issues at their last non-championship round possibly playing on their mind. Confidence not exactly as high as it had been previously. Nonetheless, they were still going and currently in 14th place on our leaderboard, second in the class. And rounding out the morning's finishers will be Michael Wilson and Ian Letman, the Class 1 pair in that fight with themselves, but unlikely to gain any overall positions without retirements up ahead due to a big deficit. This round at Milton Keynes would see a return to the British Championship for Adrian Easton-Bassett. Frustratingly, it would be short-lived though, the Range Rover driver only completing 3 runs before a disappointing early retirement. So we're a quarter of the way through what is turning out to be a pretty tough and grueling event. Nothing less than we'd expect or hope for in the British Cross Country Championship though. The leaderboard at the top is starting to shape up. It looks like this. Still on day 1 of the competition here in Milton Keynes, we go onto the afternoon runs. And there'll be some change at the top of our leaderboard. Andy DiGiulio and Paul Foley seemingly putting that bad luck behind them and taking the lead of the event. But as you might expect, you couldn't write it, could you? It wasn't without its issues. They break the diff close to the end of run 9. Thankfully, not losing much time, replacing it in service and getting back out only for something to break in the replacement. Again, thankfully, they were able to piece together a working diff from 2 broken ones to complete the day and maintain that lead by just less than 30 seconds. There'd be a bit of movement as well for others on the leaderboard. Justin Birchall and Johnny Kunja climbing up to 2nd place now. They'd be much happier to end the day in that position and with victory well within their sights for day 2. For Ian Gregg and Adam Evans, it would be 3rd place now. No particular issues for the pair. They get themselves hauled into a podium position. A good place to end the day ready for day 2 of that fight. And things were picking up now as well for Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson. The course was more familiar and they were putting in some good times, fastest on the final run of the day as well. The reason for much of this change at the top of our leaderboard would be problems for this man. You wondered where he'd gone, didn't you? Paul Rowlands, Neil Lloyd alongside. They break a belt on the 7th run of the day, effectively ending their chance of a victory this weekend. They were still going though, despite that cruel look, once the car was repaired, lying in 5th overall. There'd also be problems today for Martin and Aston Cox, breaking the steering on the car on run 10 and taking a maximum. Thankfully, they do maintain a decent position on the results. It's damage limitation from 6th. Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall, meanwhile, will be starting their climb back up the order after that earlier problem. Moving up to 7th on the leaderboard now, with at least more positions within their reach going into day 2. No change for Austin Riley and Philip Richards. They continue to put in the times, seeing them in 8th place overall at the end of the opening day of the competition. If the problems with that broken hand weren't enough, there'd be punctures causing more issues for Phil Bayliss, Lance Murphy. Certainly not how they wanted the event to go. The punctures were not going to make one-handed driving any easier, but then nothing really would. They were still going into day 2 though, importantly. And rounding out the top 10 now would be Liam Griffin and Robert Daniels. They were putting in some good times as well to keep a steady pace throughout the event so far. More attrition though. We lose Ryan and Darren Cook in the afternoon. They weren't having any luck this weekend. It was probably best to call it a day. A bit of change for Class 7. There was some luck to be had today. Chloe Jones and Chris Aldred would now be leading the way, but they couldn't back off at all going into day 2, and they needed to make sure that they came out of the blocks fighting from the very first run of the day. No pressure. That reason, in part, for the change around in the class would be a maximum time for Richard Green and Richard Griffiths. A broken track rod end would see them drop down the results. But Jones had done the maths, and the stage times on day 1 would mean that Green could take the lead back by the end of day 2. The fight would well and truly be on. Unfortunately, the day hadn't quite finished claiming cruise on this motocross course. We lose Michael Wilson and Ian Letman in the Freelander, the diff exploding in the car and damaging the engine in the process. A long and grueling day one complete then. The results at the top are looking like this going into day two of the competition. Here we go then, day two here in Milton Keynes, and there wouldn't be any change for Andy DiGiulio and Paul Foley at the top, with everything fixed and working on the car remarkably. All they needed to do was maintain that lead to the finish. Of course, that's easy for me to say, sat here. So that means it would still be second for Justin Birchall and Johnny Cunha, pushing hard now. The times were similar. They weren't really gaining on the leaders, but they weren't falling back either, and that is crucial. Something would be needed, though, to be pulled out of that bag for the final runs of the event, if they were going to take a victory this weekend. Things still going well, meanwhile, for Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson, rounding out the podium at this stage and happy to be doing so. 1 minute, the difference between themselves and Birchall up ahead. A tall order to try and change that in the remaining runs without problems up ahead, but you could guarantee that they'd be trying. Ian Gregg and Adam Evans, meanwhile, were still putting in some good times to make sure that they weren't far outside of the podium places after the morning's runs. They were certainly there, waiting to pick up the pieces. They maintained fourth place for now, themselves with around 30 seconds to Jacks up ahead. And things were now going much better on day two for Paul Rowlands and Neil Lloyd. No more issues, but they'd have some ground to make up for yesterday. They end the second morning of the weekend with fifth on the leaderboard. Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall will be working their way back up the leaderboard as well now. One heck of a fight back on our hands for the rest of the day. Up to sixth place, just behind Dad Paul on the results, although there would be a few minutes separating them still at this stage. Outside of that family battle, it was Ocean Riley and Philip Richards in seventh. They do gain a position in this loop, but the times to the Rowlands up ahead were probably too big to change in the final runs. But we do love a bit of optimism here in the British Cross Country Championship. The reason for that move up the results, though, for Riley would be in part down to a move down the results. That's how it works, right? For Martin and Aston Cox, they were still suffering with steering issues into day two, and it would give them another maximum time on run 13. They end the morning, as a result, with 8th. It had been a painful weekend in more ways than one for Phil Bayliss and Lance Murphy, and they were adding to their issues with some rear diff problems in the morning's runs. They just needed to get to the finish now and keep their championship hopes alive into the final round in a few weeks' time. 9th place for now. And it's still Liam Griffin and Robert Daniels, meanwhile, rounding out our top 10 overall. Just a few runs remaining to finish this tricky event. Things were definitely going to plan for Chloe Jones and Chris Aldred in their class battle, having taken the lead. They do exactly what they need to do, coming out of the blocks, fighting to stay ahead in that position. And they were doing a good job of it as well, starting the day off on a strong pace. Things looking good for the pair this weekend. So that, of course, means it's second in the class for Richard Green and Richard Griffiths. And it wasn't such good news that Chloe Jones was on the pace, because Richard Green was perhaps not. Around a minute to find if they wanted that lead back. But the times this morning just weren't going to cut it. We've got just a few runs remaining here at the penultimate round of the championship, and there is still plenty to play for throughout the results. On we go then to the final runs of the weekend, and there'd be indeed no change in Class 7. Richard Green and Richard Griffiths give it their all, but it just wasn't enough. Second place in the class this weekend. Meaning, of course, that after taking the lead on day one, it is the class victory for Chloe Jones and Chris Aldred. A great way to end the season, and taking the class championship for 2019 with them as well. A good team effort, not only from this pair, but the friends and family, both on the event and behind the scenes. Even at this level, it's all about that support you get back home. No change for Liam Griffin and Robert Daniels. They still managed to round out the top 10 overall, taking the Class 11 victory in the bowler. And fair play to them for continuing, but this would be a weekend to forget for Phil Bayliss and Lance Murphy. Although it would be hard to forget after Phil was fitted with a plaster cast after leaving the event. All that was left now was, well, apart from a beer to recover, a fast recovery to get the championship back on track at the final round in a few weeks' time. Ocean Riley and Philip Richards dropped back to 8th place overall in the final runs of the day. They wouldn't be too bothered about that though. Still a good result, and of course the class victory would be theirs as well. So for Martin and Aston Cox, it would be a place gained on the overall times. It wasn't the result that they came here fighting for, but it was at least a finish. Important at this stage of the season, of course. 7th place overall, 2nd in the class this weekend. Everyone seemed to be holding firm in the top of the results. No change for Jason Rowlands and Matthew Hall. They end the event with 6th place overall, taking 2nd in Class 5. And finishing just ahead of them on the leaderboard would be Paul Rowlands and Neil Lloyd. That win slipping away from them with the issues on day 1. So 5th place would be the best that they could hope to have salvaged this weekend, as well, of course, as that win in Class 5, which could prove crucial. For Ian Gregg and Adam Evans, it would be a nice, straightforward event. The pair getting to the finish just outside our podium positions in 4th. Of course, with that, taking the Class 6 win as well. There'd be last-minute drama for Justin Birchall and Johnny Kunja. They'd need to replace the diff before the final run of the event after it developed problems. Not a good weekend for diffs, this one. They needed to put in, get this, a time faster than they'd gone all weekend if they wanted that result. Frustratingly, despite a valid effort, it wasn't to be. 3rd place on the podium would be theirs, along with the Class 8 win, but that championship fight would have to wait until the final round. But you could guarantee one thing: this pair will be there fighting. It would be a great weekend for Mark Jacks and Adam Nicholson. That slower than usual start on the opening day may or may not have altered that final result. We'll never know now. They'll perhaps be ruining that pace on day 1. But 2nd place this weekend was definitely nothing to be sniffed at. And that, of course, means that luck, seemingly, was finally back on side for Andy DiGiulio and Paul Foley. They needed that result not for the championship, which was essentially over for them, but for their own peace of mind that they could achieve a win against the competition. Perhaps that mojo was back. So a reminder of the overall results here at the penultimate round of the Britpart British Cross Country Championship. It's a long-awaited victory for DiGiulio. The championship still undecided. The final round was set to be just as exciting as ever as a showdown. But before that, we grabbed a word with some of our finishing crews.
Yeah, long time coming, but yeah, good feeling. Nice to be back on the podium.
And back on the pace as well. So you've had a few problems this year, but the car's proved itself again today.
Yeah, most of them self-inflicted. Crashed at round 1, crashed at Sweet Lamb. Can't blame the car for that. And then we had mechanical issues at Bovington, which, you can't plan for that. And then we've come here, just keep your head down, keep at it, and got a result.
Really, really pleased. It's been a tough battle this weekend. Got here late on Friday, didn't go around the course, didn't cycle it or anything, so we just did the drive round on Saturday morning. And noticed it was rough. Car was messing about on the first couple of runs, got those issues sorted out, and then we were just battling away, really, battling with Justin. Hello, Justin, over there. He's jumping up and down. And yeah, it's been really good. Put the fastest run time in as well yesterday, and then we matched that today as well. So yeah, it's been brilliant. A great course, well organised. We've had beautiful weather, great atmosphere. No, it's been really, really good. Really enjoyed it.
Extremely tough, hard. Going back, it was like going back to National Bs, which generally run very hard ground like this. It was a bit of a shock actually. We've been out of kilter with it for a few years, so to get back into this and trying to still do the same speed we normally do, it's absolutely killed me. It's killed the car. First time I've got blisters all over my hands, but it's been a good event. Good event.
Do you have to adapt your driving style for the motocross track and then obviously going out into the farmland, or is it a similar style for both?
Motocross track's quite flowing, but when you get out onto the farmland where there's a lot of cross ruts from previous events, and we're going across them at an angle, so the chatter that's been coming through the car, unfortunately it's blown fourth gear in the gearbox, so the last 2 runs I've done without fourth. But that's how severe it is, and that happened just as we're pulling fourth. We got a severe side knock, and I just got a bad gear change, and that's ultimately what did the damage for fourth. But you've got to change your driving conditions for nice and smooth on the motocross track. On that out there, horrid, hard and horrid. But a good event.